Myra from sacredsoulpractice.com. I'm so glad you're here. I'm just checking on the iPad to make sure that we are streaming well. Let me know when you pop on, where you're from, how you're doing, how your day is going. I am grateful to be here with you. And let's get into it. We're talking about life is based on the quality of our questions. And so, what does this mean? We've been talking in our 30-day live experience for trauma informed care. We have been talking about what it is to kind of acknowledge that we have trauma, what it is, how to move through it, just very briefly, and how we best support our clients in moving through when we're going to get to when it's appropriate to support someone with the goals that they've set in the context of your coaching container versus when to refer out. There's lots of elements, right? We're going to go into the difference between therapy and coaching, so we have more good things to go into in our series. But today we're talking about powerful questions. Many people talk about questions as a tool. It's a powerful tool. I love questions. I love inquiry. I ask lots of questions. Inquiry is really when we're talking about how do we move through something by asking, right? Asking ourselves, asking spirit, asking our higher power, asking our bodies, right? Oftentimes, when we have symptoms or just feelings, sometimes that can feel, intense, when we can feel stuck. So often, when you're moving through a new goal or a new level in your life, you might finish up with one area and feel really proficient in that. And then when you start on this new level, you might feel like a novice. You might feel like you're starting all over. And that can bring up insecurity and doubt. And oftentimes, questions is a powerful tool um, of moving through that doubt and that insecurity. And so, powerful questions can help you in all sorts of ways. They help you to go deeper. And what can really be helpful is when we bring the trauma informed framework to the questions that we're asking. So, we talked about that a few days ago, the three elements of trauma informed care: it's safety, it's empowerment, it's really making sure people realize that they have choice, right? And so when we apply that to questions that we ask for ourselves, to our clients, to the folks that are in our world, it's going to be important to ensure there's a certain level of safety. Sometimes it's not always helpful to um, just ask invasive questions, right? When someone doesn't feel like they are grounded or in a good state of mind, right? Sometimes we want to make sure that we're not asking questions that um, minimize someone's experience. We don't want to invalidate somebody. We don't want to minimize someone's experience. And so it can be important to be thoughtful in what we're asking of ourselves and other people. I have created a personal boundary for myself on my own journey of really embodying trauma informed as a lifestyle, right? Hi, Pearlie. I'm so glad that you're here. I have really um, set up my own rule for myself to say, we're not going to go into deep questions, into deep inquiry when we're not in a good space. So if I feel triggered, or if I feel overwhelmed, or if I'm having just a lot of like misalignment, there's pain in my body, if I have a migraine, right? Those are not the times for me to really go into that deeper place of questioning. Now, if I have an insight or if I'm feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, I might journal. I might write down some thoughts. I might write down some ideas, right? Some like hunches or like a guess as to what's coming up. If there was a trigger and there's like a nugget in that I want to go deeper on later, I'll write it down. I keep like notepads everywhere. Just ask my husband. They are everywhere, my notebooks and my notepads and all of the things, right? And also the phone. You can just put it in your phone, in your notes. You can jot it down, but doesn't mean that you want to go deeper when you're not in the best headspace, right? It can also be important when we're supporting other people, especially for my coaches, my healers, my therapists. We want to make sure that we're asking people for consent. We want to make sure that we're asking if someone's open to going deeper or to looking at a certain thing, right? So often, I've had to work on this, right, in my own experience supporting people. But one of the things that I will say is like, are you open to going deeper? This is what I have some thoughts on this. I would be happy to share if you're open to that, right? And so sometimes we can really set that up so that we are ensuring that there's consent around what we're asking. And if we're choosing to go deeper, to see if someone has safety, if they feel grounded, embodied, centered, and if they're in a place to receive. We're going to do a live just on that, giving and receiving feedback, because it's been up so much lately. And there are really different, cool, safe perspectives around giving and receiving feedback that I want to share with you and see what resonates, what works for you, and how you can implement that to really move the quality of your interactions, relationships to a deeper level. Because oftentimes, when we don't share or we're not asking, we can be doing a disservice. And so I'll let you know what day that's happening in our 30-day series. But I want you to think about some of the questions that maybe come up for you. And a good way to think about this is when you look at where you feel stuck or what you'd like to improve. Sometimes the question is in the thing that's not working. So I reached a point in my life, honestly, like in the last 2 years, where I definitely felt stuck. Definitely 2 years ago, I felt stuck in my business. I felt stuck in the growth, in the revenue. I really felt stuck. And so, what I began to ask myself was like, what is this stuck energy about? Like, what's the feeling of it? I knew how it felt, right? Just like concrete, like hard, like gridlock, right? And so I really began to explore where I felt that in my body. And I really began to explore what the opposite of stuck would feel like, what it would look like. For me, it's always about flow, right? And so when we think about what questions to ask, you want to think about what outcome you're wanting. You don't have to be overly attached to an outcome, but there's real wisdom and truth in starting with the end in mind that Stephen Covey really helped us to see, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. You want to think about what you're ultimately wanting and start to ask questions that lead you to that. When you're thinking about a trauma informed perspective around your questioning, it can be so important for you, for the people that you're working with, even your family, like your kids, coworkers, right? To really come from a place of empowerment and strengths-based perspective. So you want to highlight your own strengths, someone else's strengths. So if you were talking with your kiddo about a certain powerful question to go deeper, it might sound something like, when you're at your best, how do you feel? When things are working well, what's happening? What time are you getting up? What are you focused on? Who are you talking to, right? What are you eating? What time are you going to bed? All of these little details give us information and help us to see the patterns of what's working well, what's just okay, what's not working, where our triggers are, right? When we are making like a safety plan for someone who's having challenges with mental health, um, or addiction, or any kind of emotional instability, it might sound like when you start to slip into the darkness, into depression, into, I hate everything about everything kind of mentality, what's happening? Same questions, right? When are you going to sleep? When are you waking up? How is your self talk? What are you eating? Who are you talking to? What kinds of information are you consuming? Are you watching the news? How long are you on your phone, right? Let's look at what's happening, not from a place of judgment, not from a place of critique, not from a place of like, this is all your fault. Like, if you had done something different, things would be different. No, that's not it. From a place of information, all information can be good information if it helps you to get where you want to be ultimately, right? Even if it feels like I don't want to deal with this. If it can help you go deeper and look at the pattern, it can be helpful. If you're wanting something to be different, if you want to stay stuck, if you don't want to look, that's okay, right? You just might not move forward in an effective way. And sometimes that's where we are, and that's okay. But for those of us who do, mindset work can be quite powerful. It isn't the only approach. There are different approaches that we're going to use in the program when we're really wanting to help support our clients best and ourselves. But a mindset is one element, right? There's also behavior. Um, those are all different strategies that can be helpful. But when we think about mindset from the perspective of how do I look at this in a way that moves me forward? I believe that our life is based on the kind of questions that we're asking. When we're asking um, negative questions, right? Even out loud, I believe the universe is always listening. It's always picking up our vibration. When we're like, woe is me, why is this happening to me? Why are things always not working out? Why is this way? Um, why am I always stuck? Why am I always broke? Why am I always, getting dumped? Why am I always losing clients? Why am I always, when we start asking questions that are going in the wrong direction, when that momentum is not going in the direction that we want to be going in, it can become counterintuitive, like not helpful. Um, it's not helpful sometimes to ask things that always, um, people already know, right? If someone looks like they're tired, saying you look tired is not helpful. Chances are they know they're tired, or they don't feel well, or something is going on. They're aware of it, right? Maybe checking in and saying, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Can I be of support to you in any way? Could be a more empowering question. It could be more empathetic, right? And so when we talk about supporting our clients, it can be helpful to support them in really noticing how they feel, kind of when it started, when do they remember feeling that way? When's the first memory of that, right? Let's just say someone's working with procrastination. A empowering question could be, when's the first time you remember procrastination being a thing for you? See what comes up. See where they feel it in your body. See where you feel it in your body. Identify a place where you're stuck, and then feel into the energy of that thing. And maybe stuck isn't the best word for everybody. There might be something that you are doing, but you want to do more of it. Feel into that. Think about what it would be to be in the energy of what you're truly wanting. When you think about if you're currently in the opposite of that right now, so if you wanted to be more kind, more aware, more patient, think about when you're doing that and when it's working well. What comes up for you? What kind of energy is that? How are you feeling? What tangible things are you doing? Right? What is your mindset? What energy are you bringing into it with your attitude, with how you're showing up? Is there intention about what you're doing? When the opposite is happening, especially if the opposite is something that you don't want, think about what's coming up for you around that when it's happening. So if you're wanting to be a more patient parent, right? Think about the times when you're not being patient. What's happening? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you making time and space for yourself? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Right? All of these things are going to go into the state of mind that you're in when you're showing up how you want to, or if you're showing up in a way that you don't want to be, right? Think about your business, think about your professional life. When you're on your A game, when things are like going so well, you're knocking it out of the park, what's happening? How are you caring for yourself? What kind of energy are you in? When you're a present partner, how are you showing up? What kind of energy are you in? How are you caring for yourself? Right? And when the opposite is happening, begin to think about what is not going so well from a place of compassion and empathy. We never want to use inquiry, asking ourselves deeper questions, going within and exploring, supporting someone else through questioning, right? We always want to be compassionate in our question. We want to be compassionate in our inquiry. And it's really important to remind ourselves and anyone that we're supporting there's no right or wrong answer when we're going deeper. There's no getting it right and there's no getting it wrong. And there's no need to blame yourself if you say something, if you answer in a way that surprises you. It's okay if feelings from the past come back up and they are challenging. It's okay. Resistance is not always bad. Big feelings are not always bad. Unpleasant feelings are not always bad. Often that is the edge of breakthrough when we are able to um, move forward. I'm seeing a comment on my end. I don't know if that's a present comment or a past comment. I'll check on that later. If you have a question or comment, drop it below so I can make sure that I see it. Um, what's important to remember and to think about? Oh, Carrie, beautiful. What's a good way to treat someone? Uh, what's a good way to treat someone who's treated you badly? It's gonna be important to think about your intention for this person, the relationship. It's going to be important to think about um, your intention for the relationship. It's going to be my kiddo stop by for one thing, check the date on that. It's going to be important to think about what is your intention for how you are treated, right? So when I see, and the context is going to go into this, and I don't know the context, and you don't need to share it in this format. But in in general, generally speaking, when someone treats us badly, it's a red flag for there's a boundary issue somewhere. Either, for example, for me, either I am allowing someone to treat me a certain way that's not okay, and I'm not speaking up about it. I have a boundary in place and it isn't strong enough, right? When we're dealing with people who struggle to honor boundaries, it's going to be important to have stronger boundaries for them, right? It's like a kid or a pet sometimes who struggles to listen and take heed. Sometimes we're going to want to have a little stricter boundaries with them because they need more structure, not less. When someone is treating you badly, some of the questions, that come up for me around what to ask about this in yourself, in your personal inquiry, and also within that relationship might sound something like, what part of me thinks it's okay to accept this treatment if you feel like you're accepting it? What part of me thinks it's okay to be treated like this? What is my expectation of this relationship? I would go in and inquire around, why does this person think it's okay to treat me like this? Have I given this person the impression that it's okay to treat me like this? Am I willing to have a conversation between me and the person when we're both feeling not activated, right? Not so triggered, where we can navigate this and just talk about the boundaries, what's okay and what's not okay. What if you're done with allowing it but need to be in contact? I think it's going to be important to keep reiterating the boundary. And the thing about boundaries is it's going to be important for you to get clear with yourself what needs to happen if they cannot honor your boundary. This can be tricky. What you're really talking about, it sounds like, is how to have boundaries with people who might be difficult. And there's a book around this that I can drop in the comment section after we're done that I was just looking up for someone else recently. How to navigate boundaries with difficult people, because there's definitely a finesse to it. It's definitely different than people who are in their right mind, who are willing and accepting of feedback. It's different than dealing with people who want to be the best versions of themselves versus someone who might be stuck with mental illness. They might be stuck in possibly addiction. Whenever you're dealing with somebody who's having some emotional challenges, setting boundaries and holding them can be harder. I physically left, and that was the best thing to do, Carrie, in that situation, because sometimes we can't navigate boundary intrusion. We can't navigate someone not honoring the boundary when we're in the same space if that person's not willing, right, to play ball. If they're not willing, it's so much harder, because you can do and say all the right things. If they're not willing to receive it and honor it, it's like you're speaking to an empty room, and that can be super frustrating. But I encourage the personal inquiry around, where have I, what part of me is allowing um, myself to be mistreated, right? Where do my standards need to be raised, right? Would be some questions to really ask. And I think ultimately, when you're saying you need to be in contact with them still, you want to really get clear with yourself and set with yourself around, if this person cannot honor my boundary, if they cannot honor my emotional boundary, if they cannot honor my healthy request for how I deserve to be treated, what is the consequence? And sometimes, unfortunately, for some of us, not everyone, and I'm not saying that you should do this, but for some of us, this is where the no contact can come up. This is where ending a relationship with someone who does not want to work on themselves in a way where they heal and grow and can honor and respect someone's boundaries, right? No contact and ending relationships is not for everybody unless they decide it is. And I'm not saying that you have to do that, but I am saying the thing with boundaries is um, there needs to be, I see you, Carrie, there needs to be a consequence, because it's almost like with a pet or a child. At some point, if the person is not honoring the boundary, there's a part of them who isn't taking it seriously and who in some ways is kind of calling the bluff, right? This can be so hard in parenting, or if you nanny, if you are even, with pets, it's like the follow through is going to be important. When my daughter was younger, the hardest thing when setting a new boundary was following through, that if she continued to do the action, there was going to be a consequence, right? And so I had to follow through on taking the thing away, or with grounding, the screens, or whatever it was. In adult relationships, it can be more challenging, but there has to be a boundary, right? There has to be this limit that is set. We're really talking about limit setting. If the person still is not honoring it, we have to ask, is it healthy for me to remain in this situation? If I need to be in it for right now, how is it best to navigate this? Is it going to be decreased contact? Is it going to be decreased interaction? Um, those are ways to deal with that. Thank you for asking, and thank you for being open and willing to receive feedback on that. It's so brave, and I honor you for wanting to definitely see how boundaries can really support you and your well-being. It's so brave to do this work for all of us. It's so brave to go deeper, to ask inquiry, of ourselves, of others. It's so important to look at that. You're so welcome, Carrie. It's so important to look at the trauma informed framework around how are we ensuring, okay, Carrie, I see you. How are we going to um, ensure safety for ourselves, that we're being treated with safety, and that we're showing up in safety and giving that to other people? How are we ensuring that safety is all around, right? How are we leading from a place of empowerment? Communication is a big part of that, because we want to tell people how to treat us. We want to show them how to treat us by how we're treating ourselves, right? And one thing that's important that Carrie brought up that's really worth mentioning is, if you've had weaker boundaries, if you've had looser boundaries, maybe no boundaries at all, it's okay. It is what it is. We've all been there. I've been there for years. Certain relationships, especially like with family of origin, you love people, and sometimes you find yourself giving chance after chance, second chance after second chance. They say they're sorry, like you're on this carousel, like you're believing the best, you're wanting them to change. You have sometimes like this fantasy around, if this could be better. There are times when it's better, and so it makes the bad times less bad. We tell ourselves all sorts of things to make it okay, sometimes for accepting not good treatment from other people and for ourselves. I've been working through boundary issues this whole summer, especially around certain relationships. And what I have found is, I had the opportunity to lean into self forgiveness. I chose to lean into forgiveness of myself for accepting treatment that wasn't good, for staying in relationships that were not healthy just because we had the same DNA, right? For really putting off hard decisions around ending relationships, right? Around saying, if you can't, if you don't choose to honor my boundary, I'm going to honor that you choose not to honor it. And the consequence of that is, like, my reality is, then we can't be in relationship because it's not healthy for me, right? And then being willing to deal with the fallout of that, because it's not always easy. Some dynamics are easier to navigate than others. Sometimes there's a huge emotional investment with people, and it can feel really scary and really vulnerable to go no contact. I remember there's someone in my family that I could not even imagine going no contact with 18 years ago. I had a friend who had suggested um, that because of just the breakdown in communication, because of just the years of like emotional challenges, she was like, maybe some space of just not talking would be better. Maybe a few months, maybe, 6 months, and just having that break. And I couldn't even fathom it. I was like, what? Like, I had never even thought about that as a tool. And I was just like a baby in my healing and evolution journey. But I share that to say that sometimes it's okay if we feel scared or if we feel vulnerable and unsure of ourselves and taking action. But what I can say is this: what I know to be true is that when we begin to take care of ourselves emotionally, spiritually, mentally, right? Um, when we begin to take care of ourselves, when we really begin to invest in bringing our own stress down, sometimes the hard truth is the question that we need to ask. Sometimes we need to ask ourselves, what is my payoff? Like, what am I getting from putting up with this? And is that okay? What am I getting for staying in this? And is it worth it? Right? Sometimes the answer might be yes. And sometimes we might not like that answer, right? Facing our own truth sometimes is the hardest, but it is the thing that will set you free. I have had to ask myself over and over again the question of, is it okay for me to put this person's needs above my own? Is it okay to put not hurting their feelings over taking care of myself? Am I really okay with that? And it also can be looking at our own shadow, our own projections around the past. Sometimes when we grow up and have experienced trauma, we are at so much we're at a larger risk of recreating it in our life, in our adult life. When we put up when we had to deal with emotional instability, emotional harm, when there was just kind of chaos, emotional chaos, when good standards weren't set sometimes when we were younger, we think that's how life is, and we can attract partners and situations that mirror our early experiences, our parental relationships. And so, in breaking those patterns, sometimes it does require us doing work around our parents, our caregivers, the people who raised us, because though that's the first relationship that we have. And when things are not solid in that, when there hasn't been forgiveness work, when there hasn't been processing and shedding of that, not just processing and talking about what happened with mom or dad or your aunt or your cousin or your foster parent, whoever raised you, right? Not just talking about the narrative. That's the content. That's the content of what happened. And there's a time and a place for that, certainly. But the bigger conversation becomes, what patterns are here that no longer serve me? If I had a dysfunctional relationship with either parent or caregiver, and I'm recreating that in my adult life, the question becomes, what part of this is serving me? What part is not serving me? What am I no longer willing to tolerate? What part of me feels scared to step outside of this pattern if this is all I know? And then how can we be with that part of us, bring compassion, bring empathy, and hold space for that younger, unresourced part of ourselves, but also make a personal decision to spend more time in our adult self, bringing empathy to our younger part who might feel desperate for love, who might be a people pleaser, who might think this is all I really deserve, right? Underneath all of the affirmations and all of the personal development work, we typically have wounds that are feeding the behaviors that we don't like and we're trying to get rid of. And sometimes in our self-help culture, right? And I love self-help, but the difference between self-help and emotional mastery is that when we decide that we want to master our emotional state, we're willing to look under the hood and say, what are the patterns that are showing up for me that I'm actively participating in that are not healthy for me, even if I'm not ready to break them, even if I'm not ready to even face them. How do I look at me, my side of the street? What patterns are happening that I'm in control of that are producing results that I don't want? So quickly, we blame other people. I've been there. When we grow up, when we have wounding, when we have old traumas that haven't truly been integrated and that we haven't truly been able to um, shift into a proper context, right? Into a greater context, oftentimes we're operating from our wounding and not our empowerment. And it takes courage to bridge that gap from wounding to empowerment. We really have to go through the swamp and come out on the other side. The swamp being all of our own emotional stuff, all of our own trauma, all of the ways that our mind makes up stories that might have been true at one time, but may not still be true. I'm trying to forgive the person. I see you, Carrie, and forgiveness can be powerful. But here's also the thing with forgiveness: we can forgive people, and the truth is, they might not be healthy for us to remain in relationship with or even in connection with. I have forgiven people that I will never speak to again. I have forgiven people that cannot remain in my life, right? Even though I don't feel ready. And here's the other thing with forgiveness. I believe you don't have to force forgiveness. You can want to forgive, and I see you in that, Carrie. That can be your intention to forgive. It sounds like for you, not even for them, but for you. I honor that. I so honor that because that's about you and that sets you free. That sets you free. And so there's power in forgiveness. But what I've also found is when we sometimes feel like we should, so we're trying to force it, it can be harmful. And I so can relate to that. I was raised, as the Southern Baptist, and I believe that to be a good Christian, to be a good girl, we had to forgive everything because it was what God wanted us to do, right? And this is a bigger conversation. But what I learned through my own healing journey was that forgiveness oftentimes is a personal journey. And when we decide to forgive for us, not because we're needing anything from anybody else, that's when we can forgive. We can mean it. We can do it because we're choosing it, not because we feel obligated. And we can do it from a place of empowerment and not from guilt and obligation. Because sometimes I think that energy doesn't really attract um, what we're looking for, what we're actually needing, the deeper desire. Forgiveness oftentimes is really about us. And sometimes in our culture, in our society, we make it about everybody else. It's really about us. And so, again, I love that you're saying, I'm trying to forgive. I really hear what I hear from that is it's your intention to forgive for you. Yeah, I was trying to do it to set myself free. And that makes all the difference. I so honor you for that, Carrie, because it really isn't about them. It really isn't. even people who have deeply hurt us. And I myself and many people that I've worked with have had incredibly damaging and terrible things happen to them. And the forgiveness process really became about setting themselves free. Because here's the truth: when we survive the actual trauma of whatever happened, when it doesn't actually kill us, as in actually like we're dead, when it doesn't kill us, it might feel like it's killed us, right? When it doesn't actually kill us and we survive it, we have survived it. But the real damage is healing the imprint that trauma has caused. And that's what takes time. Sometimes it can take a lifetime. And when we have been injured emotionally, physically, psychologically at young ages, there is a toll that takes. We have neural pathways that are created that are rooted in trauma. So, as an adult, sometimes chaos and drama and disrespect and maltreatment feels like the standard, right? It feels like that's what we deserve. And so when we're changing those neural pathways in our brain, right? When we are changing patterns that may have gone on in our family for generations, that is brave work. It takes time. We're not going to always get it right. And we're not always going to get it right in like 6 months or a year. Sometimes you can set an intention to grow, to heal, to forgive, and it could take years to actually get to the place where you feel like you're there. Sometimes when people are trying to exit a relationship or a family dynamic, they might decide that it's time to do it now. And it might be 2024 and they're still finding their way, right? Because healing is not a linear process. It doesn't go from A to F to P to Z. That's not how it goes, like in a linear way. Oftentimes there's like a loop de loop and we go back and forward like a roller coaster. It's all kinds of steps that happen on that way to freedom, emotional freedom. And sometimes we stumble, right? We feel like I have felt like I've rolled back down the hill and have to get back up and like climb up the mountain again because I've fallen all the way back down. It's not actually true. When we fall down, we don't lose the progress that we've made, but it can feel like it. It can feel like it. I've called friends, mentors, soul family, and I've been like, what's wrong with me? How did I mess this up again? And they are so compassionate in saying, these are relationships are not easy. Matters of the heart are not easy. Boundaries, honestly, are not easy for those of us who didn't grow up with them. I know people, clients, friends who like they can state their boundaries, they can enforce it with kindness, right? So beautifully. They can cut people off like they are pros. And I am just like, how do you do that? They've practiced. And for some people, they learned boundaries and they were modeled for them from young ages. There are so many of us who that wasn't our narrative. And we've had to learn it, right? It's like there's a difference between someone who has spoken a native language like from a child all the way up until their adulthood versus those of us who learn it as a second language in adulthood. It takes us time to learn that, and we still might not be as proficient in it as someone where that is their first language. It's the same thing. Boundaries is a language. Trauma recovery is a language. Self empowerment and really embodying self love is a language. And it's a language that many of us did not learn early on. So, us giving that to ourselves now as an adult, it's not going to be perfect. And so, I honor you, each of you, for embracing this journey of even being willing to ask more powerful questions, of even considering bringing this trauma informed lens to it. Where can I create more safety? When can I pause from even being in it if I don't feel safe? Where can I really ground into empowerment and um come from that place in how I show up for myself and the questions I ask myself and the space that I hold for other people? Can I be brave enough to maybe end and pause conversations and interactions that are not healthy? Just like you said, Carrie, so beautifully, you left when you did not feel safe, like you physically left. Sometimes it takes that. I've had to say, we shouldn't talk right now. Like, we should take a break because we don't see eye to eye on this. And us continuing to talk isn't going to be helpful for either one of us. Sometimes having like a hard stop is the caring, safe, empowered next step. Someone else might not like it, but that might be the next step. I've had to do that with myself. I've had to say to myself, right now isn't the time to go down this rabbit hole because I'm not in the position to think about this in a compassionate way, right? I'm not in a position to really hold space for myself. And sometimes when it's a big thing, when it's a big wound or a big, when we feel insecure about it, when it's like still a hot button issue for us, maybe it's not truly integrated or it's not truly whole just yet, there's still fragments around it. We need support in walking through it. We need support in setting those boundaries and practicing, right, in the lab of life. Life is the real coach. Life is the real curriculum. And we each have a soul curriculum that we're walking out in this lifetime. And it's not always going to be perfect, right? If you remember in school, even if you were amazing in one subject or one area, it wasn't always, for most of us, perfect. It wasn't always straight A's. It wasn't always like getting it right. Sometimes you had to work so hard just to get one skill down. It's the same way in our journey of emotional mastery. I hear you, Carrie, and I should have left a long time ago. Many of us feel that way. I've had that same thought this summer around a relationship that I really just needed to end, not out of anger and not even out of not trying to be spiteful, not trying to be indignant, simply because staying in it is more harmful than ending it. Ending it for me is painful, and a part of me wishes it could be different. But the truth is, it's not different. And sometimes facing the truth of something is the most kind thing we can do for ourselves and for them. Me trying to make it something that it's not hurts me and it hurts them, right? And so sometimes telling ourselves the truth, asking ourselves the powerful questions that lead to the truth. Why am I staying? Why am I putting up with this? What part of me thinks this is okay? What part of me needs support and nourishment as I begin to let go, if that's your choice, if that's anyone's choice? And it's okay when we're not ready to let go. I believe wholeheartedly with most any change, we're not ready until we're ready. Sometimes we're waiting to be totally ready. We might not ever be totally ready, but there are times where we're really just not ready at all, and that's okay. And we can bring in that compassion and that empathy for ourselves, and that grounding, and sometimes even giving ourselves the gift of support to work through some things that we're unable to really unpack by ourselves, to really unpack and then create a plan for by ourselves. All of that is loving, kind things to do for ourselves. And it can be really helpful in embracing um, a trauma informed perspective embodied, really being compassionate to ourselves with our own history, with our own traumas, and bringing gentleness and kindness to ourselves and then to other people. And sometimes the most gentle, most kind, most honest thing is to tell ourselves the truth and simply be honest about what's working and what's not working, what we're ready to face, and sometimes even what we're not ready to face. But the more that you do this work, the more that you cultivate courage and the more that you're willing to have honest conversations with yourself. And that is truly what helps move us forward. I am so grateful to have had this conversation with you all. I hope that it serves. If you have a takeaway from today, I would love to hear it. I would love to know what nugget you're taking away, what you're going to set with. Maybe it's using powerful questions more. Maybe it's journaling on some of the questions that I've mentioned. This is one where you might want to watch the replay certain parts and journal out the questions. You're so welcome, Carrie. So welcome. If you have questions about, what are some powerful questions that can really get you into the core of whatever it is, post that. I'm happy to support you. Powerful questions is my thing. I can think of them all day long. So I'm happy to share some of the magic ones that I found with you. And several were dropped in this live. So go back and watch. Also, and we'll be back here tomorrow for more of 30 Days of Trauma Informed Practice, the live experience. Thank you for being here. I care about each of you so, so much, and I'm honored to walk this path with you. I will see you tomorrow. Bye for now.